In the 1980s, there was this serial killer in the making, and the police were stumped.
Right, and then a group of psychics met and meditated that the killer would be caught.
And just 2 days later, the killer called the police and gave himself away.
Welcome to Bell Arcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband tells the stories.
And this one begins just as high schooler Amie Hoffman was waking up on her very last day. Amie Hoffman was a beautiful 18-year-old cheerleader with Parsippany High School, and Tuesday morning, November 23rd, 1982, started out like any other day. Amie got up, got herself dressed, and went to school. All day long, she shared excitement with the other cheerleaders about the upcoming Thanksgiving Day football game. Parsippany wasn't a huge city, and the high school football games were a pretty big deal. And the Thanksgiving Day game? Well, that was the biggest of the year. After school, the cheerleaders all had practice, and when they finished in the locker room, all the girls were pretty jazzed. They felt like they were ready for the big game. Amie had to go to work directly from practice. She worked at a fashion store, and she always dressed the part, and her coworkers always thought that she wore just the cutest little outfits. Today, she was in a purple short-sleeve sweater, a plaid skirt, and cowboy boots. And one of the cheerleaders actually recalled later that she thought that Amie's outfit was just so cute. The store that Amie worked at was located in the newly built Morris County Mall, and interestingly enough, it was called the Surprise Store. Well, Amie got to work and everything was fine. And as she was working inside the store, just after the sun went down, there was no way that she could have known that the arbiter of her fate was right outside. A couple of mall employees noticed a suspicious-looking light green Chevy slowly cruising through the mall parking lot. They couldn't really get a good look at the driver, but the car was an early 1970s model with 3 taillights on each side, and they could tell that it had been in a couple of fender benders because both the passenger side door and the driver's side door had a few dings. Well, as Amie was working inside, this car was slowly cruising outside through the mall parking lot, weaving its way around the stores as if it were looking for someone. And then, perhaps noticing that it was being watched, it quickly sped away. But a short time later, it returned, and this time, it drove around to the backside of the mall where the employees usually parked. After a bit, the witnesses lost sight of it, and they just assumed that it had gone. Well, unfortunately for Amie, it hadn't, and a little while later, when Amie's shift ended, she organized her things, closed up the store, and then walked out into the very dimly lighted back parking lot. At first, she thought that her car was the only one out there, and she started walking toward it. But as she approached it, she could see that just on the other side of her car, there was another one. Well, we can't know for sure, but we can guess. That must have been just a little bit hair-raising, right? I mean, all of the other employees were gone, and all of the mall shops were closed. Well, she kept walking. She got to her car, got inside, and put the key into the ignition, and then someone ambushed her. There was a momentary struggle, and then this perpetrator got Amie from her car into his and then drove off. A couple of hours later, when she failed to return home, her mother went out to the mall looking for her. Well, she found Amie's car sitting alone in the mall parking lot. The driver's side door was open. Amie's keys were in the ignition, and her pocketbook was eerily sitting on the passenger's seat. This, of course, was a mother's worst nightmare. Well, she immediately called the police, and they arrived right away. They blocked off the area, and they started looking for clues, but they didn't find any. The police dog did, however, follow Amie's ascent from her car into a nearby stall. At this point, Amie could have been anywhere. Well, the very next day, a local psychic named Nancy Weber got a phone call.
This woman called me, who I had met maybe a year before at a party, calls me out of the blue and tells me her daughter's best friend is missing, Amie Hoffman. And I immediately had a vision in my mind of a girl lying there with dark hair, very sweet, pretty, all bloody, all knifed up, and knew she was raped and tortured.
Well, time passed, and then on Thanksgiving Day, the day of the big game, a couple who were out walking their dog came across the body of a young lady face down in shallow water. She was wearing a purple sweater, plaid skirt, and cowboy boots. It was, of course, the body of Amie Hoffman. Well, the area quickly became a crime scene, and the police deduced that after she had been abducted from the mall, the killer took her here to this secluded area, forced her out of the car and into the woods, where he proceeded to rape her at knife point.
Amie was brutally murdered. First, he had sex with her, and then he just cut her and slashed her body. And then after she died, he continued to slash the body even more.
Even though the crime scene was horrific, the killer didn't leave many clues here either, and the cops still had very little to go on. Well, the next day, the newspaper printed a story about Amie Hoffman, and psychic Nancy Weber was confused.
The next day, the newspaper showed Amie Hoffman was found at a reservoir, and she was fully clothed and death undetermined cause because there were no marks on her, nothing. I'm going, what are they talking about? They're crazy.
Interestingly, just as Nancy was mulling this over, there was a knock at her door.
We would often, a lot of the guys on the police department, we all knew Nancy very well, and we would often stop by her house just for a cup of coffee and to shoot the breeze. And on this particular day, I stopped by Nancy's house and for the coffee, and we started with normal chit chat. And then she said to me, she says, "No, why are they lying about Amie?" I said, "What do you mean?"
This report on Amie Hoffman, I don't get. She was raped and tortured, and she was thrown into a reservoir. So they say fully clothed and no marks on her. They don't know cause of death. And I'm going, who's kidding who? He said, I have no clue.
At that point, none of us knew that she'd been. So I don't even think the lead investigators knew at that time because they hadn't completed their post-mortem examinations on her and hadn't gotten any test results back from the labs or anything. But at the time, they were saying that she had not been sexually assaulted. And I let it go at that and finished my coffee and went on my way.
Well, the investigation continued, but without many leads, the case just kind of stagnated for a minute. But then the police started doing interviews, and they interviewed the cheerleaders. And when they did, they found out that during the weeks leading up to Amie's murder, the cheerleaders were all getting these obscene phone calls. The calls would come in to a payphone that was just outside of the school gymnasium where the girls would practice. The phone would ring, and when one of the girls would answer, a male voice would ask inappropriate questions like, "What are you wearing?" and "Do you like to kiss?" And he also seemed to know intimate information about the girls, as if he knew them personally, and at times he would even ask for a girl by name. Before the murder, the girls just thought that these phone calls were coming in from a harmless pervert, and they would listen for a bit, maybe laugh and giggle, and then hang up. But now, after Amie's murder, well, all the cheerleaders were understandably terrified. The police, not knowing if this guy was targeting cheerleaders, all told them to stop wearing their Letterman's jacket and to give no indication that they were cheerleaders. Well, the phone calls were investigated, and it turned out that the person who was making them was a young, socially awkward assistant coach who had a cheerleader fetish. And although he shouldn't have been making those phone calls, he had absolutely nothing to do with the murder. So, after ruling him out, the police found themselves back at square one with no leads. But then, on December 5th, 1982, a truck driver who had just pulled over to the side of the road to get some sleep heard a banging on his door. And when he opened it, well, he saw a naked, bloodied woman begging for help. About 3:45 in the morning on December 5th, just 12 days after Amie Hoffman had been murdered, a truck driver who had pulled off into a rest stop to get some sleep heard someone banging on the side of his truck. Well, a bit groggy, he opened the door.
And Deidre was still alive. She walked up to a tractor trailer that was parked there, knocked on the door, and when driver opened the door, he saw her being naked and bleeding from the stab wound to the stomach.
The woman was terrified, and she was completely covered in blood, and she just kept saying, "He stabbed me, he stabbed me." Well, the truck driver, of course, was completely blown away. He instantly jumped into action, wrapped his sleeping bag around her, and then called for help. And as she was laying there, literally dying in his arms, coughing out blood, she told him that her name was Deirdre O'Brien, and she said that she could feel the life inside of her as it was ebbing away. But she wanted to tell this man all she could about the person who had done this to her. And she described this guy in pretty good detail. Well, before long, she turned cold and then stopped talking.
So over his CB radio, he called for help, and then he tried to comfort her, but she passed away in his arms while they were waiting for medical aid.
A couple of hours earlier, before this call came in from the truck driver, police had found an abandoned car sitting in the grass on the side of the road. And just like with Amie Hoffman, the driver had suddenly been snatched away. The lights were on, the key was in the ignition, and a pocketbook was sitting eerily on the passenger's seat. Inside the pocketbook was the identification of Deirdre O'Brien, who of course was the young lady who ended up at that truck stop. Now the police knew that they were dealing with a serial killer. But he wasn't just targeting cheerleaders. Deirdre was 25, and she was out of school, so all young women were in danger. There was some good news, though. When the perpetrator ran Deirdre off the road, his car left tire tracks in the mud. So the clues were building. Everyone was looking for a light green 1970-style Chevy with damage to both sides of the car, unique tail lights, and now these tire treads that match the ones here found at this second crime scene. Now, mind you, at this point, none of this was public knowledge. Only police officers on the case had this information. But still, nobody had a clue who the killer was. Well, there was this big meeting between police departments where a large task force was created to look for this killer. And during this meeting, it came out that the newspaper had got it wrong. Amie Hoffman had been sexually assaulted.
And they briefed us on the details of the investigation. And it was at that point that they said, yes, she had been sexually assaulted. And that's when I said, holy cow, Nancy knew this.
Not really sure what it meant, but thinking that, well, maybe Nancy could be beneficial to the case, Officer Hughes reached out to a higher-ranking detective.
Realizing that Nancy had known something that nobody else had known at the time, I approached Jim Moore and told him what Nancy had told me a couple weeks earlier.
And at that time, I said, well, I really don't believe in psychics, but we have nothing else to go on, so I'd be willing to at least meet her.
The next thing I knew, a knock on my door that same day that the task force was formed.
Oh, we get to the house, and I make the introductions, and Nancy really didn't, say too much, but she did tell Jim that I don't want you to tell me anything about this case. She says, I'm going to feel stuff, and I will tell you about what I feel and what I know.
And they asked if I would be willing to repeat what I had told Bill about Amie, because it was not on the radio, it was not on TV, it was not news yet. And so I repeated what I saw about Amie. And Jim looked at me and said, would you come with us for a ride?
The officers first took Nancy to the parking lot where Amie Hoffman had been abducted.
We went to that, and we didn't tell her anything. We just drove around the parking lot, and she took us directly to the parking spot where Amy's car was found and had been left behind. She took us right to that spot, and she talked about the struggle, the fear that Amie was having at the time, and how cold the killer was, the kidnapper was.
The three of them spent quite a few minutes here in this parking lot, while Nancy apparently felt just the empty cold-heartedness of this killer. And according to the officers, it was pretty intense. But it was nothing compared to what Nancy would experience at the next stop. After spending some time here in the parking lot where Amie had been abducted, they all got into the car and then they headed toward the area where Amie had been murdered. And along the way, Nancy started getting impressions from the universe.
In the car, it was like, think of a puzzle and you drop the puzzle out of the box. That's how things came to me. Little pieces here and there, and then they'd form more information for me. He first lived here, then he went to Florida. And, oh my God, he murdered somebody in Florida and went to prison and murdered his cellmate.
The one thing that I found particularly impressive was that out of the thousands of names that are possible, Nancy was able to pick the perpetrator's name out of thin air.
And in between finding out he was in Florida, his name is James. Okay. His name is James something itch. He's Polish. It's a Polish name. I can't get it. I don't know how to get it.
Nancy did know his name was James.
She knew it was James, and she knew his name started with a K.
Another impressive thing was Nancy knew how to get to the crime scene, and not just to the big open area where this took place at, but the specific location where the murder took place. And that information hadn't been released to the public yet.
Yeah, she kind of knew the directions. Turn here, turn there. We went up to the reservoir, and she got out of the car and she walked around, wasn't saying too much, and she pointed to the corner of the reservoir where Amie's body was found, and she described the brutality of it, how she was cut up really, really bad, and she was visibly shaken. You could see that Nancy was shaken because it appeared that she was feeling what Amie was feeling at the time.
After that, they took Nancy to the rest area where Deirdre O'Brien had died, and she described what happened there as well. Well, to make a long story short, Nancy got emotionally connected to these victims, and she believed that the police weren't moving fast enough, and if not stopped, this guy was going to kill again. So Nancy took matters into her own hands, and one rainy night, she met with 4 other psychics. They all held hands, and they spoke to the universe as if it were a person, with intention.
We need you to know that the person I believe is the serial killer, James something itch, cannot cause any more harm to anybody. You need to stop him and return the pain to him instead of his giving it out any longer. It needs to be finished. Thank you. And that was it. And then we all sat there quietly.
On Sunday, January 16, 1983, the police got a phone call from a man who claimed that he had been stabbed. The man's name was James Gerald Kadadich. Well, emergency services were sent out to his home, and a police officer took a statement. But in the process, the police officer noticed the man's car, and it matched the description the police had of the perpetrator's car. So they checked the tire treads, and of course they were an exact match. Well, Kadadich was arrested, and many of the officers on the case got a phone call Sunday morning.
So Sunday morning, I got a call from the sheriff's department letting me know that they had arrested Kadadich. I called Nancy and I said, Nancy, what'd you do?
I said, what do you mean, what did I do? He said, James Kadadich. That's his name, I shouted. I was so relieved. I said, yeah? He said, he was picked up.
Well, of course, the police put cuffs on him and they took him in that very day. So the big question is, who stabbed him, right? Well, that's the interesting part, because even though she lived miles away and couldn't possibly have done it, Kadadich described his stabber as being somebody who looked remarkably similar to Nancy Weber.
And he claims that some brown-haired woman with long hair, fairly long, stabbed him in the back.
Kadadich was charged and he was ultimately convicted, and of course he was taken off the streets so he couldn't hurt anybody else. So, what exactly happened with this case? Was it luck? Coincidence? Maybe, but that would be quite a bit of coincidence, don't you think? In any case, the detectives involved, they didn't believe that it was luck.
But yet, it turned out that all her information was spot on.
But like I say, as far as Nancy goes, I kept notes and I had them for years. And everything that Nancy told me about Kadadich was exactly true.
So what I found most interesting, you know me, I'm the more skeptical between the two of us, I think. When we went out and we met Bill, he seemed like a rational, normal person to me. Yet he was adamant that there was something special about Nancy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Something, kind of piggyback off of that is when both of the officers that we talked to discussed how Nancy was at the scenes, right? She'd never been at the scene, and yet she was able to, Bill said it's like you could tell she was feeling the pain of Amie, and that almost made me cry because I thought, here's this woman, right, just trying to help out, and can you imagine? She's so brave.
Yeah.
She's going to go into this situation where she's going to be in terrible pain, just to try to help these families and try to catch a killer.
Yeah.
So that to me was the most fascinating part about this. And there's something else I wrote in my notebook. So Bill was talking to us about having Nancy in the backseat of the car. It was Bill and another police officer. And I'm not sure what crime scene they were driving to or from. But he said all of a sudden he hears Nancy in the backseat say, "And you'll never know."
And we're on Route 46. I'll never forget it. We just come underneath Route 80. And she leans forward and she taps Ernie on the shoulder. She says, "You'll never know." We get back to the station and I ask Ernie, "What was that all about?" He says, "I was just thinking about what it would be like to get her in the rack."
What?
And I was like,
That's right. I remember.
What?
Oh my God. That's right. That was, so you know what I'd love to do? I'd love to talk to that officer.
Yeah, me too.
I wish we could get an interview with that guy, right? It's like, how did that feel, right?
Right. And I love how Bill wasn't afraid to share it at all. He's like, "No, it's fine. I mean, it's just more evidence that there is something going on with her mind."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still can't get over the fact that people that are world known, I guess, are talking to a little YouTube channel, right? It's just me and you. And I think that that's just the coolest, right? And she's not paying me to say this either. If you're looking for a psychic that's genuine and you believe in psychics and you want one that's real and loving and genuine, I recommend that you check out Nancy.
Yeah,
right? I
agree.
So we're going to get into what you think about this case and what I think about this case in just a second. But before we do that, this video is a little bit different. So here's the thing. We started our YouTube journey in late 2022, and we thought, how hard could it be? All we want to do is share mysteries. That's it, right? And it's been one heck of a journey, and we've learned so much, and we wanted to give back. So can we say free merch? So here, why don't you go ahead and pull a name?
Okay.
Yeah. So what do
it
you
is one. It's a long.
So who is it?
Francis Hatton.
Francis Hatton.
Yes.
He's been with us since we were TSO.
Yes.
Right?
He has. Oh my gosh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So Francis, here's what I need you to do. First of all, go to our store at Fourth Wall and look through all the merchandise. Email us what catches your eye. You got to contact me. This is the 4th of September, so you got to contact me by the 15th. Pick out something for $25 or less, and we'll send it to you. We'll pay shipping and everything. And this is something we're going to do every few weeks for our subscribers whenever money says we can afford it.
All right. Well, what is your verdict on this mystery?
Before the police knew that this guy was James Kadadich, they had no clue. She's riding with police officers who are in on the case. She pulls out of the air. His name is James something itch. And then later they find out that this guy is James Kadadich. How is that possible? My mind has a hard time with that. So I'm not saying that I believe in psychics, but what I am saying is that does make me think. So that's as best as I can do. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I am sold that she helped to solve this case. I'm sold because of what the police officer said, that they noticed when they were working with her. Also because when Jim Moore called and said, Nancy, what did you do? I got chills up my spine because he was just telling us this.
Yeah.
We didn't prompt anything.
No, none of this
I
is
had not
prompted.
read anything about that. We were just talking about the case. And when he said that, I got chills up my spine. I thought, wow, here's Nancy saying, well, we got together and we petitioned the universe for this specific thing. And then the next day she gets a call and says, what'd you do? Because he was stabbed. And we've got him in custody.
Yeah.
So that's my verdict. And this case really does remind me of a case that we did on Reports of Paranormal Events, or ROPE. So that case was another psychic, Noreen Rainier. The way she helps police is quite intriguing, I think. So we'll leave a link to it for sure.
Yeah, it's somewhere on this page right now.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.